The UK Prime Minister, on a new leg of his visits to European capitals, this time the Labour leader Keir Starmer, welcomed on the red carpet by Italy's far-right premier Giorgia Meloni. Starmer hailing Meloni's pragmatism in slowing the flow of migrants to Europe. He was later welcomed by his Italian far-right counterpart before visiting an immigration coordination center. The visit comes one day after another migrant tragedy in the English Channel, with at least killed in the capsizing of a small vessel.
We also discussed the challenge of irregular migration. This is a problem across Europe, for both of our countries in particular, but across Europe. As Director of Public Prosecutions in Britain some years ago, I saw the important work that can be done across borders on issues like counter-terrorism. And I've never accepted, as we discussed, that we can't do the same with smuggling gangs. And now, of course, Italy has shown that we can. You've made remarkable progress working with countries along migration routes as equals.
Well, for more, let's turn to Philip Turr from our International Affairs Desk. This is coming from the Labour Prime Minister.
Well, they're unlikely bedfellows, to say the least, because Giorgia Meloni comes from a far-right neo-fascist background and Keir Starmer comes from a socialist centre-left background. But they have found common ground when it comes to fighting migrants, because this is a huge political issue, not only in Italy, but also in the United Kingdom. And it's been a huge political issue in the United Kingdom for many years. It was one of the reasons that the United Kingdom voted to leave the EU in the referendum of 2016. There have been multiple attempts to try to stem the flow of illegal immigrants coming to the United Kingdom from France. And what we've seen over the past few years is a gradual increase in the number of migrants coming to the UK, and it seems whatever that the government tries to do isn't enough to stem that flow of illegal migration. And I think that explains why, when Keir Starmer sees what's happening in Italy with a 64% lowering in the number of migrants coming to Italian shores over the past year or so, he wants that to be the case also in the United Kingdom. And that's why he's gone to talk to Giorgia Meloni to find out what she's doing, what the British can copy in a bid to bring down that flow of illegal migration. Remember, if that doesn't happen, this is going to be the key deciding issue on the popularity of Keir Starmer in the UK, how he deals with illegal migration, which is practically the number one issue apart from the cost of living and the National Health Service in the UK. So he wants to make something happen and appear that he's up there dealing with the problem to be able to come back and say, yes, we're going to deal with it. This is what we're going to do. We're going to model our current fight on illegal migration on what is going on in Italy, where they brought it down by 64% in the past year.
Does it hurt him with his own constituents to be these photo ops? I mean, we remember Tony Blair came in for scrutiny when he vacationed with then conservative leader Silvio Berlusconi in Italy.
Well, I think that if you look back to Tony Blair and Silvio Berlusconi, maybe they had slightly more in common than Giorgia Meloni and Sir Keir Starmer potentially have in common as leaders. But they're both in power. They're both prime ministers. They're both within Europe, even though the UK is not in the EU anymore. And I think they're both confronted with the same problems, which is keeping their approval ratings high by dealing with the migrant crisis. Now, there have been a lot of complaints about the way Italy is dealing with this, particularly with the way that the EU has clamped down on migrants coming from Tunisia and from Libya. There have been lots of complaints that the way these migrants are treated, particularly in Tunisia, is sort of like handing out money to dictators there because there's been a clampdown on democracy. But I don't think that's an important issue for the Italians. What they want to do is to build migrant centres in Albania. There are 2 which are under construction, nearly ready to open. And this is something that is interesting the British, because they say we're not reaching an agreement with the French. The French we can't negotiate with them, because what the French are doing is saying, OK, we've got boats in the Channel. Those migrants on the boats, they don't want to stay in France. They want to go to the UK. So we're just going to make sure that those boats don't sink in the Channel, but we're going to make them get to English waters, and then the British can deal with it. And the British are saying, well, look, the French are not doing enough. They want a system more like what the Italians have signed with both Tunisia and with Libya. That remains to be seen whether there's going to be any negotiation with the French over all of this. But it's two different ways of dealing with the crisis which are incompatible for the moment. And I think that's why Keir Starmer, maybe even out of desperation to try and show he's doing something, has gone off to talk to Giorgia Meloni.
All right. Speaking of closed borders and speaking of left-of-center leaders, Germany's Social Democrat-led government instituting its day one, what was announced last week, and that is the return for 6 months at least of border checks for all of its neighbors. There have been complaints this Monday. The mayor of the French border city of Strasbourg says that the measure is artificial and sends the wrong message. The government of Olaf Scholz insists it's necessary to thwart illegal immigration and Islamist violence. Laurent Berstecker has more.
Parked on the side of the road, German police signal incoming vehicles to stop for an identity check. An unfamiliar scene at the Franco-German border city of Keir, where such controls had largely been scrapped since the introduction of the Schengen system 30 years ago.
We're not setting up the classic border post, and we do not check every vehicle or every person. Rather, the checks are targeted at vehicles suspected of carrying illegal migrants.
Germany says the decision to reinstate temporary controls at its western and northern borders was necessary in order to curb illegal immigration. The changes come amid a recent surge in arrivals and a string of suspected Islamist attacks on German soil, as well as growing support for the far right, which recorded historic electoral successes last month. German authorities insist the measures, which are set to last an initial 6 months, are compatible with European law, but neighboring countries fear they could disrupt trade and traffic and force them to implement similar restrictions at their own borders. In the Luxembourg city of Schengen, where the landmark European treaty was first signed in 1985, visitors and residents expressed similar worries and hoped the controls wouldn't impact their freedom of movement.
It's for our security, but it shouldn't get out of hand, because we would like to cross the border swiftly.
The controls have a big impact on commuters. They are not efficient. I doubt they really help catch people who enter illegally.
Last year, Germany introduced similar controls at its borders with Poland, Switzerland, and the Czech Republic. It says these have already helped prevent some 30,000 illegal entries into the country.
And we're in the company of Philip Turl and of Camille Le Coz, Associate Director at the Migration Policy Institute. Thank you for being with us here on France 24.
Good evening.
If you've ever taken that tramway line which runs across the Rhine from the city of Kehl to Strasbourg, your thoughts on what these border checks mean?
Yes, these border checks, comes in a very difficult context for the government in Germany. There's been this political defeat in the last regional election in these two lenders. There's been this terrorist attack committed by asylum seekers and refugees, and more broadly, there is a sense from lenders, from municipalities, that the system is under pressure. Because Germany, I think it's important to remind ourselves, has been, hosting a lot of the refugees who are coming to Europe. Most recently, with the Ukrainian refugee crisis, they're hosting about a quarter of all refugees coming from Ukraine. So, among the public in Germany, there is a sense that they're doing a lot compared to their other European neighbors, but also that there is a need for more controls.
Is it justified?
So the question is, I would say it's also what effects is that going to be? Is that going to have? Because what we're seeing here is that there's going to be a lot of, spot checks here and there. People who don't have documentation to cross the border might be sent back to the country. That's what the report alluded to. But people who want to claim asylum are still going to be able to do it. The thing is, if they have transited through another EU member state, that member state should be, responsible for their asylum claim as per EU law. So what we're likely to see, and this is, a large part of the conversations that are happening now in Germany, is how to increase cooperation on these transfers from asylum seekers, who get to Germany to the point where they first entered Europe.
What can be done on that score?
What can be done to support Germany, or what can be done more broadly? I think what we're seeing now is really concern, and that's why also in the past week we've seen so many reactions from other EU member state neighbors and further away, because Germany has played such a key role in the common European asylum system. They're a bit of a champion in terms of hosting refugees and making sure that every time there's been, a solidarity mechanism at EU level to support Italy or Greece, they've contributed. And so if we're at this point with a government that's a coalition, on the left, that's deciding to adopt this rhetoric on closing the borders, there is a concern as to, on the one hand, the future of Schengen, and then what the future of a common European asylum system may look like.
Camille Le Coz, your reaction to the fact that Britain is no longer a member of the European Union, but it seems to be part of this conversation. Keir Starmer was in Berlin and Paris, and this subject came up. And now, of course, we've been talking about it with Philip in Rome this Monday.
Yes, this was really a gap, from the Brexit agreement, cooperation on migration. We're seeing, the dire consequences in northern of France with people who keep dying. I think we've seen, especially in the past few weeks, the toll the current measures, the current policy are having. So this is a positive development to have this approach, this reset approach, and that finally there is a partner in London to negotiate, a new agreement potentially between the EU and the UK. Now, what I think is a bit striking in this visit of Keir Starmer to Italy is that Starmer is going to Italy at a moment where he might have gone to Paris to have a conversation as to what future cooperation in Northern France may look like. On the one hand, yes, to dismantle the smuggling and trafficking networks, but also to have a serious talk about what's going to happen with the people who are there and who are trying to cross and will continue to try to cross the channel.
And this is the center-left Keir Starmer we're talking about, just like you were talking a moment ago about the center-left Olaf Scholz. If we're going to break this down along political coloring, has the right won the argument when it comes to how to handle migration policy?
So I think we're seeing two different scenarios. In the case of Germany, I would argue they're trying, to have this short-term political measure. But, deep down, all of the measures that already exist in terms of integration of refugees are going to stay the same. When it comes to the UK, I think we're at the beginning of this term of the Labour government. And what we're seeing is after so many years of a Conservative government, it's very difficult to have a conversation about comprehensive approach to migration response. And we're seeing how, after cancelling the deal with Rwanda, the new government is looking for other options to tackle this migration situation. There's been a lot of talk about, countering smuggling and trafficking, but more needs to be done, working around safe pathways, but also cooperation with the EU to ensure that people, in Northern France who could apply for asylum in France could potentially stay there.
Philip Turl, you were mentioning earlier about the Italians having these holding centers in Albania to process asylum requests. Keir Starmer was asked about this in Rome this Monday, and he said that it was he was non-committal about whether or not Britain would go down that route.
Well, I think what Britain would like to do, obviously Keir Starmer has scrapped the idea of sending migrants to Rwanda, and from Rwanda they can make an asylum request, but not necessarily if they get that asylum request approved, would they have been allowed back to the United Kingdom? And it was the Rwandans who were dealing with those asylum requests. What he would like to do, and I think that's what the Italians are doing, is to set up these 2 centres in Albania, and it's the Italians who will be dealing with the asylum requests within Albania to decide whether or not those candidates can come back to Italy or be admitted to Italy legally afterwards. But the bottom line here, Francois, is that whatever the EU tries to do, whatever the British try to do, those migrants are still coming. I'll just give you a bit of some figures, food for thought. 22,000 have tried to get over the Channel this year so far to the United Kingdom. That's more than at this time last year. Since 2018, when records started, we've had 135,000 people who have crossed the Channel. And in that period as well, 186 people have died. So if you compare the 135,000 who have crossed the Channel to the 186 who died, there is still pulling power thinking there's more of a chance I will get across the Channel than I will be killed in the sinking of my boat. And that is why those numbers are still coming and still increasing. And that's why I think the British authorities are so at a loss about what to do to stop those migrants from coming. And that explains why Keir Starmer has gone with a new view to not being able to stop it with the French. Let's try and stop it with the Italians when they're coming over the border to Lampedusa. Now they're going to maybe be sent to Albania in place of that. And that's where maybe we can also intervene to stop those migrants coming to the United Kingdom.
Camille Le Coz, again, it gets back to the issue of is there now a Europe-wide consensus on this effectively?
I think, well, this agreement with Albania for now is very much, a pilot. This is in the making. This has not happened yet. And I think the British government, as many other European governments, are waiting to see what actually happened and whether indeed the Italian government can, set up a system that comply with EU law. Where I think, there are more opportunities at the moment is also through working in the countries of origin, in the countries of transit, to create better conditions for people, to address all of the reasons that make people leave in the first place, and also to set up an environment in the transit country, in the countries that continue to host the majority of refugees, so that these refugees have better conditions in this host country, being Turkey, Chad, Kenya, and other countries.
Camille Le Coz, many thanks for being with us. I want to thank as well Philip Turl for joining us. Stay with us. There's more to come here on France 24. More news plus the day's business. And in sports, will the Premier League go after Manchester City over financial fair play issues?